Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 25th, 2024. It has been 3,894 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 217 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 214 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 51 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday morning. Our Russia-Ukraine war map is a great companion to the podcast, and there is a link in the podcast description. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. There are no changes from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, I won't mind. I won't even know. 1. United States military aid to Ukraine is poised to end on September 30th, 2024, beyond already committed deliveries and funding, which will be catastrophic for the Ukrainian armed forces. 2. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 3. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies and international organizations to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 4. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. The continued attacks are increasing the probability of a nuclear accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants due to a loss of external power connections. 5. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance, the United States and Germany is a complete failure that has only encouraged Russia to escalate hybrid and kinetic warfare actions against the NATO alliance and Ukraine's allies and their economic interests. 6. We maintain that autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 15th is unrealistic. 7. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. Here is today's action report summary. Yesterday, Russia carried out 154 discrete assaults, and through September the 24th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 179. For the second day in a row, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, did not report the number of Russian airstrikes or fire missions. In the Kursk region, Ukraine controls 1,043.5 square kilometers, with another 282 in the grey zone, for a total area of 1,323.5 square kilometers. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in northeastern Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. Like yesterday, there was less reported activity in the Kursk region of Russia, so today's Russia Theatre of War section will be a summary. There weren't any significant reports of changes in the Kursk region. New geolocated videos from between September the 15th and the 23rd confirmed that the line of conflict is at the pig farm between Veselaya and Glushkovo. Satellite images also confirmed the existing line of conflict on the railroad grade west of Sadove Tovarishestvo Glushkovo. South of Korenevo, satellite intelligence indicated that fighting continued in the northeastern part of Byakhovo. The grey area was reduced to the north of the village. Satellite images and NASA fire information for resource management systems also indicated that fighting continued in southeastern Obukhovka, the one by Korenevo, and the activity appeared to be intense. In the Kremenna area, Ukraine attacked a tree line with a Dragon drone east of the settlement. There was also strong evidence of airstrikes by the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, to the south and southwest. West of Dyakovka, on the railroad grade, a Russian BMD-2 infantry mobility vehicle was destroyed. The map was adjusted based on the confirmed location of Russian troops traveling south. A woman living under Ukrainian occupation in Sverdlikovo reported that the VKS had bombed the village 6 times on September the 22nd and once on the 23rd. An important clarification from our team. Our analysts noted that several Russian and Ukrainian sources were referencing our map, claiming that Ukrainian forces had advanced into Popovo-Ležachi, north of Tyotkina. The geolocations on the map they are referencing are the pedestrian bridge Russia destroyed on August the 17th and a geolocation of Russian troops in the village on September the 5th. There is a video from September the 18th claiming to be recorded in the settlement by Russian troops that we could not geolocate. We have no information to support any claims that Ukrainian forces are operating in the village or that fighting is ongoing. Let's talk about what is happening in my home of Ukraine. We start in the Kharkiv Oblast, in the Liptsevo-Ovchanskoye. The main Defense Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, or the GUR, confirmed that Special Operation Forces, also known as SSO, stormed the machine aggregate plant in southern Vovchansk several days ago. The operation was supported by artillery and the Ukrainian Air Forces. Ukrainian SSO cleared all 30 buildings of the compound, engaging in hand-to-hand combat at times against the Russian garrison, which had been surrounded for 3 months. Elements of the Russian 45th Special Purpose Brigade of the Airborne Forces were among the defending forces. The GUR reported that prisoners were taken, but didn't include a number. We can confirm that at least 1 prisoner was taken, based on a video we reviewed and authenticated. Russian mail blogger Alexander Kharchenko confirmed Ukraine liberated the area and complained about Ukraine's superior drone warfare capabilities. Quote, "The enemy's," quick sidebar, he means Ukraine, "fantastic number of strike and reconnaissance drones too often turn our strongholds into besieged fortresses. It is often impossible to use people to transport everything necessary, and we still have huge problems with robotic systems. Numerous ground robots shine at exhibitions, but they are practically never seen on the front lines. The same can be said about transport copters." Unquote. In the Luhansk Oblast, west of Svatove, fighting continued in the areas of Stelmachivka, Druzhelyubivka, and Novoyegorivka. There were no changes to the line of conflict. West of Kremenna, Russian forces tried to advance south from occupied Makiyivka in the direction of Nevske and west in the direction of Hrekivka. Russian forces were able to advance within Nevske, north along the Zherebets River. Attempts to advance south into Novosadove were unsuccessful, as were attempts to advance east of Turske. Moving to the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast in the Donbas, in the area of Kostiantynivka, Russian forces attempted to advance in the direction of Minkivka from their stronghold on the E40 highway. They were unsuccessful. Russian troops were restrained at the Siversky Donetsk-Donbas Canal in Kalynivka, in the Canal district of Chasiv Yar, and east of Stupochki. Ukrainian troops repulsed another Russian attempt to cross the canal west of Kurdyumivka. In the Toretsk-New York-Oyo, Russian forces continued their assaults supported by artillery and the VKS. Ukrainian troops were geolocated in the high rises between Mayakovsky and Druzhba streets, 2 blocks south of school number 6. We reduced the area of Russian control. Russian forces continued their attempts to advance towards Sherbynivka, and fighting was reported on the outskirts of New York. the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces carried out 25 assaults in the Pokrovskoye, indicating that Moscow wants to lock Ukrainian forces in place, but is concentrating available combat power in other regions. GSAFU reported that Russian troops concentrated their efforts at Novotoretsk, attempting to advance in the direction of Myrolubivka. Yesterday's assessment that Russian forces advanced into Krutый Yar was accurate, with elements of the 25th Air Assault Brigade engaging Russian troops in the village. A unit commander with the Ukrainian 68th Yega Brigade said that in their sector of the Pokrovskoye, the front has, quote, somewhat stabilized, adding that the city of Pokrovsk is already lost. Quote, moving has become much more difficult, transporting ammunition has become more difficult, but not impossible. We are forced to defend ourselves all the time, and slowly, if there is no other possibility not to be surrounded or something else, slowly withdraw. Ukrainian artillery units confirmed that the artillery ammunition disadvantage is more balanced, with troops firing one large-caliber round for two from Russia. To some degree, the improved accuracy and fire control of the NATO-aligned systems helps reach parity. What every Ukrainian unit is saying to anyone who will listen is the biggest issue is the VKS and their use of precision glide bombs. A member of Ukraine's 28th Mechanized Brigade said, quote, if they keep dropping 15 to 20 bombs a day, this place, another quick sidebar, he's talking about Pokrovsk, will be destroyed. Intense fighting also continued in the Kurachovo area. After reaching the railroad grade north of Tsukurine, Russian forces started attacks in the direction of the village. In our assessment, if the Russian plan is to attempt to advance on Hirnik from the north, the coal mine complex along the railroad should be defensible for Ukrainian forces. Heavy fighting continued in eastern Maximilianivka, where Russian forces were restrained. In the Vuhledar area, Russian forces reached the eastern edge of the settlement. Russian troops captured coal mine number 3 west of Vodyane, raising their flag. After the VKS bombed Vuhledar and ground forces carpeted the remains of the settlement with Grad rockets, Russian infantry, supported by one tank, entered from the east. In a later development, a Russian mail blogger reported the sharing of the video violated operational security, revealing the first Russian assault group to enter the settlement that occupied a single building. In so many words, the mail blogger implied that the Russian assault was repulsed because of the near real-time intelligence posted on the social media app Telegram by the Lgov French channel. The Russian-owned US news site Forbes claimed that the Ukrainian 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which has defended Vuhledar for 2 years, has started its planned withdrawal from the settlement.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is today's theater-wide update, where the biggest events shaping the future of Ukraine and Russia happened far from the battlefield. At a meeting of the United Nations Security Council, Russia's permanent representative Vasily Nebenzia repeated Russian propaganda and disinformation, calling Ukrainians Nazis, questioning the existence of the country, calling the government a regime, accusing soldiers of war crimes, and claiming Ukraine is using blocking troops. After his statement, the Secretary of State of the United Kingdom, David Lammy, slammed Nebenzia, the Russian Federation, and autocrat Vladimir Putin. Secretary Lammy.
But, Mr. President, I also want to speak directly to the Kremlin and its representative here today. And Vladimir Putin, Russia sits on this council, but its actions tear up the UN Charter. Russia sits on this council, but over the weekend we saw it put forward amendments designed to wreck the UN's future. Russia claims to stand for the global south, but it runs roughshod over international law. Vladimir Putin, when you fire missiles into Ukraine hospitals, we know who you are. When you send mercenaries into African countries, we know who you are. When you murder opponents in European cities, we know who you are. Your invasion is in your own interests, yours alone, to expand your mafia state into a mafia empire, an empire built on corruption, robbing from the Russian people as well as Ukraine, an empire built on crushing dissent, courageous opponents like Navalny, an empire built on lies. But I say to the Russian representative on his phone as I speak that I stand here also as a black man whose ancestors were taken in chains from Africa at the barrel of a gun to be enslaved, whose ancestors rose up and fought in a great rebellion of the enslaved. Imperialism, I know it when I see it, and I will call it out for what it is. In this week, when I'm here talking to other partners around the world about our shared futures and the future of the UN, Russia is trying to return us to a world of the past.
United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the UN, quote, "The question is not what Russia will do. We already know. The question is how we, the members of this Council, can end Putin's war and reinforce the international rules and rights that make all our nations safer and more secure." Blinken also called for the US to halt Russia's alliance with Iran and North Korea. How that would be done while maintaining Washington's global policy of compromise is very unclear. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis, said that no lasting peace in Europe is possible until Russia is deprived of its imperial ambitions and Ukraine is a member of the NATO alliance. Minister Landsbergis.
It's very clear. We expect Ukraine to win. That is the only way that we believe is to stop Putin and to stop future aggressions. The question is, how do you prevent Russians from continuing their aggression or attacking again? And in order to stop this, the only way to do this is security guarantees. And the only security guarantee that actually works in Europe currently is Article 5.
During the General Assembly of the UN, US President Joe Biden discussed Ukraine during what was his farewell speech. Here is President Biden.
When Russia invaded Ukraine, we could have stood by and merely protested. But Vice President Harris and I understood that that was an assault on everything this institution is supposed to stand for. And so, my direction, America stepped into the breach, providing massive security and economic and humanitarian assistance. Our NATO allies and partners and 50-plus nations stood up as well. But most importantly, the Ukrainian people stood up. I asked the people of this chamber to stand up for them. The good news is Putin's war has failed and at his core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free. He set out to weaken NATO, but NATO is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever before, with 2 new members, Finland and Sweden. But we cannot let up. The world now has another choice to make. Will we sustain our support to help Ukraine win this war and preserve its freedom, or walk away and let aggression be renewed and a nation be destroyed? I know my answer. We cannot grow weary. We cannot look away, and we will not let up on our support for Ukraine, not until Ukraine wins a just and durable peace in the UN Charter.
Speaking with the United States news agency CNN, the Foreign Minister of Poland, Radosław Sikorski, once again called for the restrictions placed on Ukraine to be lifted. Here is Minister Sikorski speaking with journalist Christiane Amanpour.
I was in the Ukrainian city of Lgov, and they killed a family. The father watched the bringing out of the bodies of his wife and 3 daughters, and they're doing it all over the place. They've destroyed, it is estimated, 70% of Ukraine's electricity and heat generating capacity. So yes, those restrictions should apply, but the missile that killed that family was launched from a Russian bomber flying over Russian territory from a Russian airfield. Give me one reason why Ukraine should not be able to take out that bomber and take out that airfield.
So why? Give me the reason. You're NATO. What's going on? Why?
We are making those arguments to the US.
Sikorski also addressed the UN, joining Lamy in criticizing Nebenzia. Back to the foreign minister.
The Russian ambassador has talked about children's graveyard in Gaza, which is indeed a tragic situation. Well, Ukrainian children are targeted not only with bombs. Thousands have been kidnapped and taken into Russia, where they are brainwashed in order to strip them of memories and of their national identity. Russia claims that these children are orphans, left alone in a war zone. Another lie. Many of them were separated from their parents, either by accident during attacks or deliberately by the aggressor's army. Independent reports revealed that, and I quote, officials have deported Ukrainian children to Russia or Russian-held territories without consent, lied to them that they weren't wanted by their parents, used them for propaganda, and given them Russian families and citizenship. Special camps offer the abducted children Russian patriotic education, and a hotline was established to pair the minors with potential foster families, luring the latter with money. On top of that, Mr. Putin signed a decree fast-tracking the process of granting Russian citizenship to stolen Ukrainian children. This is not collateral war damage. It was a plan devised before the war and ruthlessly executed. UN investigators concluded that these actions constitute war crimes. In October 2022, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. Ambassador Nebenzia and Russian propagandists like to refer to the democratically elected government of Ukraine as Nazis, as you've just heard. It so happens that in Poland, I live 3 kilometers from Potulice, the site of a former Nazi filtration camp during the Second World War. It's known for the fact that thousands of children were imprisoned there, from Poland and the Soviet Union, from around Smolensk and Vitebsk. Up to 800 of these children died, but thousands were transferred west to be Germanized. Blonde, blue-eyed, Aryan children, deemed to be racially suitable. I therefore have a few questions to the Russian ambassador and his superiors. How does what you are doing to Ukrainian kidnapped children differ from what German Nazis did to your children and ours? This is Russia's shame that will not be forgiven or forgotten.
After yesterday's statement by Chancellor of Germany Olaf Scholz that Berlin will not approve military strikes on Russian territory, the press secretary of the Ukrainian president, Sergei Nikiforov, said the two had a completely private, closed-door meeting. Not even translators were included in the discussion between the two leaders. The president of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, clarified his statement from yesterday that Ukraine may have to temporarily cede territory to Russia in order to reach a peace agreement. Quote, I have never doubted that we should support Ukraine in restoring its territorial integrity, that this is the ultimate goal. We just have to be realistic about the time horizon and the price of achieving this goal. Victory over Russia in Ukraine at the cost of destroying half of the Ukrainian population is probably not a victory. Politico is reporting that over the summer, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, told Zelensky that while Ukraine may have to compromise on some issues to reach a peace agreement with Russia, any proposal to end the war should not include giving up any territory within the 1991 state borders. Their source was a, quote, high-ranking Ukrainian official, unquote, who had permission to speak on the record. The Washington Post reported that the Biden administration was not impressed by Ukraine's victory plan, but there's a problem with their anonymous sources. Journalist Alex Raufoglu attended a briefing with a senior State Department official with other journalists who reported that President Joe Biden has not seen Ukraine's victory plan in full detail, with the first discussion scheduled for Thursday. Raufoglu wrote on Twitter, also known as X, quote, "As for Ukraine's request to use long-range weapons deep inside Russia, the official expects that issue will also be discussed on Thursday." The Washington Post wrote that part of Ukraine's victory plan was to have more authority to pick its own long-range targets, including power plants, electrical substations, refineries, and oil depots. A senior military official, speaking off the record, said that Ukraine was reliant on US intelligence to receive target coordinates for strikes. Without that information, critical targets could be missed. The unnamed official added that Ukraine has used the missiles provided by the United States, France and the UK on, quote, "what we could consider less important targets." German news agency Der Spiegel reported that during a planned visit to Germany by President Biden from October the 10th to the 12th, the German government is planning to invite French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer to Berlin so the trio can meet with Chancellor Scholz. The meeting reportedly is to focus on how to support Ukraine. The four leaders are providing, or have the capability to provide, weapons capable of deep strikes inside Russian territory. Don't shoot the messenger. We only report the news relevant to Russia and Ukraine. Every time I mention Donald Trump, our inbox fills with messages. Speaking in Georgia, that's the state, at a campaign event, former president and Republican candidate for president Donald Trump said that he would get the US, quote, out of the Russia-Ukraine war if elected. Former President Trump.
Biden and Kamala got us into this war in Ukraine, and now they can't get us out. They can't get us out. I watched him. We will. He's been saying that for 3 years. Every time Zelensky comes to the United States, he walks away with $100 billion. I think he's the greatest salesman on earth. But we're stuck in that war unless I'm president. I'll get it done. I'll get it negotiated. I'll get out. We got to get out. Biden says, we will not leave until we win. What happens if they win? That's what they do, is they fight wars. As somebody told me the other day, they beat Hitler, they beat Napoleon. That's what they do. They fight. And it's not pleasant, but, we've given them close to $300 billion. And you know what Europe has given them? Which is approximately our size when you add up the countries together. Their economy, it's very close to our size. They've given them like a small fraction of that number, just a small, very small fraction.
Moving to some critical fact checks. Since 2014, including the period when Donald Trump was president, the United States has provided Ukraine with $58.5 billion in military assistance. Of the $117.4 billion approved by Congress since 2022, per May 10, 2024 report by the Conservative Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, over $40 billion is directed to the replenishment of the U.S. military inventory, that is, will be spent on the United States military, and almost $10 billion is earmarked as loans that Ukraine needs to pay back. Another $37 billion has been allocated for economic support funds. From January 24, 2022 to June 30, 2024, the United States has provided a total of $75.1 billion in aid, compared to $110.2 billion from Europe. Currently, over $16 billion in replenishment funds and $5.9 billion in Presidential Drawdown Authority have gone unused and are set to expire on September 30th. Since the start of 2022, countries outside of the United States have pledged $262.6 billion in assistance through various programs, including $187.2 billion from European nations and over $12 billion from Japan. Further, a November 2023 congressional report found that in terms of GDP, the United States ranked the 29th in providing support to Ukraine. The truth matters, and none of this is meant to disparage your chosen or undecided presidential candidate, for the 43% of our listeners from the United States. President Zelensky will travel to Washington, D.C. on Thursday, where he will meet with a bipartisan delegation of congresspersons and senators and hold a separate meeting with President Joe Biden. Zelensky is expected to meet with Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris on the same day. The British newspaper The Guardian and the Associated Press reported that former President Trump is expected to snub Zelensky. That's the word used by an official with the Trump campaign, adding that no meeting has been scheduled. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson said that he is unsure if he will be able to meet with the Ukrainian president due to him being out of town on September the 26th. U.S. journalist Jake Sherman reported that the House and Senate have agreed to a procedural vote today, which will speed-run a clean continuing resolution that will keep the U.S. government open through December the 20th. The bill makes no provisions to keep unused Ukrainian aid from expiring, and tomorrow's vote will bar the introduction of motions and changes to the bill. The White House has reportedly come up with a Plan B. However, it would restrict Biden from transferring any materials or weapons that weren't already allocated in earlier shipments. As an example, the White House could send additional Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, but would not be able to send F-16s, as the United States didn't transfer any of the aircraft to Ukraine. Technically, $100 million is available after September the 30th that could be used for alternative weapon systems. Ukrainian forces are reporting that approximately 5 out of every 10,000 artillery shells provided through the Czech-led ammunition initiative fail, with some exploding just 20 meters from the barrel after being fired. Our analyst team is talking to people smarter than us to learn if this is good, normal or bad. The Duck Potato Prince, the self-declared illegitimate president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, is angry at his neighbor Lithuania. According to news agency Zim Live, in March, Lithuania confiscated 17 fire trucks from Zimbabwe meant for Belarus for attempted sanction evasion. The emergency vehicles were ultimately transferred to Ukraine. On the subject of Belarus, Ukraine reported that a Belarusian Air Force Yak-130 two-seat subsonic training jet briefly violated Ukrainian airspace. Ukraine scrambled fighter jets and issued an air raid alert. The Belarusian plane returned to its airspace without incident. Remember the ground-launched small-diameter bombs, or GLSDB, that Boeing and Saab jointly developed. The ones that didn't do well in field testing due to issues with GPS jamming, inflexible software, and issues with the wing deployment. Hide your favorite coffee cup. Ready? Saab announced that after being awarded a $494 million defense contract from the United States, that's not money associated with Ukraine, the factory that will build 80 anti-tank guided missiles and the GLSDB will be built in Grayling, Michigan. Here's the fine print in 2026. Finally, the Netherlands announced a $235 million package to support the restoration and hardening of Ukrainian critical infrastructure, including the electrical grid. We're unclear on what the plan is to prevent Russia from destroying the repairs with glide bombs. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.